Good afternoon. Welcome, good people, to the Larry Hayes First Amendment Forum. My name is Evan Davis, and while I may look old enough to have been a founding father of our country, I can only lay claim to that honor with the new organization that is producing today's program, Hoosiers for Separation of Church and State. I want to thank you for coming here today. Thank you for acting on your concern about the rise to power of Christian nationalism. And thank you for your interest in learning more about how it gained power and what we can do about it. Sadly, we are gathering at a time when gun violence has again made national news. We grieve for those in Colorado and for those in Utah, where a controversial speaker's First Amendment rights were erased by an assassin's bullet. We are here today to exercise the rights he was denied, to share information and opinions. We hope that talking, listening, and respecting each other can bring light to these dark times. And we do have an enlightening program for you. There will be 3 main speakers and 4 panelists. Topics include how Americans for Separation of Church and State is fighting for us in the courts, about how so many of our rights are endangered, and about the theology that drives the Christian nationalist political movement. You will be happy to know that we have included 3 biology breaks. Restrooms are to the left when you go out into the foyer. The middle break will be there for 15 minutes and will include water and cookies, although we ask you to keep food and drinks out of the auditorium. There will be time during that break and at the end of the program to talk with our members and panelists, our members and our allies at tables in the foyer. Some of our speakers and the panelists will be there too after the program concludes. We hope you will take advantage of these opportunities to make contacts and to learn more about how you can be involved in this contest for the soul of our country. Also, I need to explain about donations to our cause, should you choose to make one during the breaks or later. If you use our QR code, you will be electronically channeled to the Unitarian Universalist congregation, which is where Hoosiers for Separation began, and which handled our funds for us in our first few months. We are working on setting up an independent donation process, but for now, anything you donate electronically will go through the church treasury, but it will not be used by the church. And as it happens, we decided in the past couple of days to have armed officers provide additional security. If you feel moved to donate to help defray that expense, please go to our Hoosiers for Separation table at the big break or after the program, and we appreciate any help you may be able to provide. We intend to wrap up the program before 5, and as most of you know, everyone should be leaving the area by 5:45 in order to be out of the building before the library closes at 6. But let me tell you about our closing event. At our UU congregation a few weeks ago, we heard a marvelous, inspiring duet. It is titled Change on the Rise. The 2 singers and their accompanists have graciously agreed to do an encore after our panel discussion closes. We know we are serving you a full meal of information today, but we do hope you will stay for this delicious dessert. Numerous thank yous are in order. Several volunteers have made this event possible, as have several donors, and we thank them all. We also thank the library for this fine facility and the professional assistance that is available to all of us in Allen County and for many different kinds of programs. The library's Access Fort Wayne department is recording the program so it can be shown on their TV system and so we can show segments at future events. We also want to thank the security officers for agreeing to be here on short notice in a time of increased national anxiety. I would like to recognize, if they would please stand up, our new UU minister, the Reverend Mandy Beal. Where Reverend Beal? Thank you. And we are expecting two of the pastors at Beacon Heights Church of the Brethren today. I know Pastor Paula Ulrich is here. And I don't know if Pastor Annalisa Gross has arrived yet. Okay, well, she is expected to be here shortly. But Hoosiers for Separation is presently alternating our meetings between these two churches, and their support has been very helpful. If there are any other clergy persons in the audience who would like to stand, please do so now. And that's one of our goals. We have had friendly relationships with a number of congregations, but so far we have two that are really standing up. So if you know of anybody who can help bring that to the cause, it would be helpful. It is difficult, I know, for congregations to be involved in issues of religion and politics, but that's where we are today. Finally, let me transition to the meat of our program by telling you a little about the late Larry Hayes. He was the editorial page editor of the Journal-Gazette in the 1980s and 90s. He won dozens of awards from state and national organizations and had critical roles in such significant community improvements as the desegregation of the Fort Wayne District's elementary schools, the training of police officers to recognize mental health crises, and the ban on smoking in city restaurants. However, as one of Larry's editorial writers for 13 years, I was most impressed by his dedication to researching before he wrote. Instead of coming up with his own ideas to address problems, as many of us do in editorial writing and lots of other occupations, Larry preferred to find out what was already working in other communities. Larry based his work on facts, not ideology. And I'm sure most of us here today wish that were more common in some of the media and the religious houses, and especially in our government. Larry deeply valued our federal Constitution, particularly the First Amendment. You would expect that of a journalist because of the amendment's guarantee of press freedom. But Larry was not trained as a journalist. He was trained in the Christian ministry and in a very conservative denomination. While he eventually left the denomination, he always cherished the ministry of Jesus, the ministry of hope and care for all. And he respected the First Amendment's protection of religious freedom, a freedom that is now very much under assault. He would be appalled at the way the language of religious liberty has been interpreted in the 21st century so that you can ignore such things as civil rights laws by claiming they violate your religion. Larry believed, as do I, and I expect most of you here today, that religious freedom means you are free to believe and promote your religion without either oppression or sponsorship by the government. Okay, that's enough eulogizing, sermonizing, and editorializing by me. Please now let me introduce our first speaker. He is a veteran of 10 years communicating for social justice rights and is an honored documentary producer. He is also the new Media Relations Manager for Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Americans United has been standing up in the courts for our true religious freedom since 1947, and our Hoosier group is affiliated with that esteemed organization. Please welcome Moises Serrano.
Hey there, everyone. Welcome. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Let me just get set up here very, very quickly. So my name is Moises. I am the Media Relations Manager for Americans United for Separation of Church and State. We are the organization dedicated solely to defending church-state separation. So we are the shield that is protecting the foundational American principle of freedom of religion, including the right to believe or not to believe for every single person in the United States. Today I want to share a little bit of the work that we do, and I'm going to play a video for you.
I can't imagine a better life for us than as parents. I wanted to be able to have at least one biological child. Then we realized that a biological child wasn't an option for us. Then we decided to do the foster to adopt.
We started lining everything up.
So we found a child, a little boy in Florida. This one stood out to us. Unfortunately, as a Christian organization, our executive team made the decision several years ago to only provide adoption services to prospective adoptive families that share our belief system.
Liz just called me crying. Because we were Jewish, we weren't able to be parents. It was a gut punch. Our taxpayer dollars are going to foster care, yet we can't adopt a child through that system.
I know it's hard sometimes seeing any of your friends that have kids. You're happy for that person, but you also long for that.
Project 2025 is this voluminous 900-page document that the Christian Nationalist movement has come up with on how they're going to take over the United States, basically.
To know that Project 2025 recognizes what's happening and is supporting it, it's really hard to swallow.
It's really disheartening to see that there's entire political arms at this point hell-bent on trying to make us second-class citizens.
We know this is an injustice.
If Project 2025 can come for us, it can come for anyone. Americans United for Separation of Church and State. That kind of sounds like what we're trying to do right here.
They've been along with us for all the struggles and the ups and downs. They handle all the really complicated things that I don't always understand. We tell our story and they take care of it from there.
They're dedicated to the cause of not letting a theocracy be established.
Americans United has been a light for us in this difficult time.
We're still nervous, but at least we know we're not alone.
And so you just heard a little bit about Liz and Gabe Brutenram of Knoxville, Tennessee, clients of Americans United. We have been representing them since early 2022 after a taxpayer-funded foster care agency in their state, Holston Home for Children, told Liz and Gabe it wouldn't provide the foster care training and certification that they needed because they are Jewish, and the agency would only serve Christians. This isn't 1940s America, this isn't the 1950s or 1960s America, right? This happened in 2021. As a result, Liz and Gabe were unable to proceed with the adoption of a little boy. They were heartbroken and understandably upset that they were discriminated against because of their religion. Liz and Gabe's own tax dollars were used to fund discrimination against them. A relatively new state law actually permits this discrimination. And AU took on Liz and Gabe's case to challenge that law as a violation of church-state separation. Sadly, what happened to Gabe and Liz isn't as rare as it should be. They aren't even the only prospective foster care parents that AU has actually represented. But cases like the Root and Rams are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the attacks that we have seen so far under this administration. Christian nationalists and their allies have launched a full-scale attack against church-state separation and the rights and freedoms that we all depend upon it. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the roadmap. So I want to talk about what Christian nationalism is, how it has been showing up across the nation, especially in public education. That's the majority and the bulk of the work that we do. Explain why church-state separation is the antidote to Christian nationalism, and I want to end by how we can fight back. So what is Christian nationalism? And I'll get to the second point before I get to the first one there. But as someone who grew up in a Catholic family and who has worked with Christians across all denominations and people who do not have faith or believe in nothing, I believe that no one, and especially Christians, would ever say that Christian nationalism has anything to do with Christianity, right? So Christian nationalism is a cultural construct and a political ideology rooted in the misunderstanding or the lie that America was founded for European Christians only, and that our laws must ensure that this privilege continues at the expense of literally everyone else. So the data bears this out. I want to talk very briefly about some polling that the Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI, has done. And so they have classified people who Christian nationalism, and they've classified folks into 4 groups. So adherents, so that's people who adhere to Christian nationalism, who fully believe in it. That's one group. Sympathizers, people who don't identify or adhere to Christian nationalism, but they're sympathetic, right, to the idea. The third one is skeptics, right, people who are skeptical and most likely to reject Christian nationalism. And then you have rejectors, so people who flat out do not believe in Christian nationalism. So I'm going to get a little negative before we get to the positive, but 83% of what they call Christian nationalist adherents believe that God intended America to be a new promised land where European Christians could create a society that could be an example for the rest of the world. So 83% of Christian nationalist adherents believe in this sentence. The good news is that only 1 in 10 Americans is a hardcore Christian nationalist supporter or adherent. When you add in the sympathizers, though, you're about 3 in 10 Americans, so not a negligible amount. So that means 3 out of 10 Americans do not mostly or do not completely disagree with these statements. The U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. U.S. law should be based on Christian values. If the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore. Being Christian is an important part of being truly American. God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. When you add to this the Christian nationalist skeptics, right, the people who are skeptical of the Christian nationalist ideology, but have some of it in them, we are looking at 67% of the population now. Again, one more big negative before I get to the positive. There are Christian nationalist allies right now in the highest levels of government, right, and we have seen that in our everyday lives. They are in our school boards, they are in our state houses, they are in Congress, they're in the White House, and sadly also in the U.S. Supreme Court. But if you look at it from a different perspective, and that's what I'm here to talk about today, 2/3 of Americans are either skeptics or rejectors of Christian nationalism. And rejectors outnumber adherents 3 to 1. So we're dealing with a minority of people in America who lean towards or are Christian nationalists. And the skeptics, The people who mostly disagree with most of these statements I read previously are not just persuadable, they're winnable. And that's our work here today at Americans United and all of you here today with us. Christian nationalists reject the separation of church and state promised by our Constitution so that they can embed their religious perspective into our law and use it to force everyone else to live by their narrow beliefs. Christian nationalists oppose equality for anyone who isn't part of the traditional power groups. So sure, you don't want brown and black people and religious minorities to have power, but also they don't want all white Christians to have the same amount of power either. So only those who pass their religious litmus test are allowed to have power. So for example, if you're white and Christian, but also you're LGBTQ or female, you are second class too. So is Christian nationalism new? And the answer is no, it is not. But it is particularly aggressive right now. Trump may be emboldening Christian nationalists, but this movement didn't start with him. So why are we seeing this incredible surge now? So at Americans United, we like to describe it in this way. Ultra-conservative Christians are raging against the dying of their privilege. And that's who is at the core of this movement. And for me, that's kind of a hopeful answer because they are reacting to America's increasing diversity. There are a lot of changing demographics in America. In 2014, America stopped being a majority white Christian country, and that is a big deal. By 2045, white people will no longer be the majority in America, another seismic change coming to our country. Nuns, the religiously unaffiliated, now make up an estimated 26% of the population. So to give you a comparison point, they are now nearly double the percentage of white evangelicals. So when you add to that the social changes that have taken place in the last 15 years alone, we have witnessed our first black president, our first black South Asian and female vice president who also ran for presidency. We've witnessed the rise of the Me Too and Black Lives Matter movements. Marriage equality became the law of the land. And the number of Gen Z and young adults who are identifying as LGBTQ is at its highest point for our youth than it has ever been. These are enormous changes, and there's currently an enormous backlash against them. So one way to talk about what's going on is when you're accustomed to holding privilege, and to be specific, all of us are in certain ways, progress towards equality can feel like oppression. It feels like it's coming for you, even though it's about bringing us all to the exact same level playing field. This is why you so often hear white conservative Christians saying they and their religious beliefs are under attack. A great example was Trump announcing days before the election, "I will create a new federal task force on fighting anti-Christian bias." That'll be done immediately. You'll note he hasn't promised to form a task force to investigate anti-Semitism or anti-Muslim animus, anti-immigrant animus, or hate crimes towards any other racial or religious minorities. But make no mistake, their goal of power and privilege for a select few is in direct contradiction with our country's promise of equality for all. Here's just a few ways that Christian nationalism is advancing right now and how Americans United is fighting back. Public education. So Christian nationalists have launched a sort of two-pronged attack on public education. So even as they try to funnel more money, more public money, public tax dollars that we contribute to private Christian schools, they're also trying to insert Christianity into our public schools, right? It's on two fronts. So two reasons that we're seeing this, and the focus on education is money, right? There is a lot of money for the billionaire allies of Christian nationalists to make off of private schools. Indoctrination. Christian nationalists know that their demographics are a losing equation, so they need to indoctrinate a new generation of children and censor their books and their curricula. So over the summer in Trump's big, beautiful budget bill, Congress created the first ever national private school voucher program that states can opt to join. This voucher program will likely divert billions of taxpayer dollars to private schools every single year. Just this year, Indiana legislators expanded the state's private voucher program to be universal, a move that will likely further divert resources from public schools to private religious schools. So at AU, we oppose private school vouchers for a variety of reasons, not the least of which because they just don't work. And they violate the religious freedom of taxpayers like you and I who are forced to fund private religious education. But what many people don't know is that private schools and the movement for private schools is rooted in a reaction against Brown versus the Board of Education and a desire to divert public school funds to white Christian segregation academies where white Christian families sent their kids when public schools were desegregated. Religious coercion, that's another pillar. So public education, pillar number 1, religious coercion, pillar number 2. So we are already seeing Christian nationalists trying to impose their religious views on public school children in states across the country, from Florida to Ohio, from Texas to West Virginia. So 10 commandments. 3 states, Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas, have already passed laws which require public schools, and in some states, public school libraries, to display a specific Protestant version of the 10 commandments in every single classroom. The Supreme Court of the United States has already struck down a nearly identical law 45 years ago in Kentucky. And this summer, in cases brought by Americans United and our allies, federal judges have already ruled the new laws in all 3 states to be unconstitutional. Thank you. Thank you. I also needed a water break. So Americans United, we have filed lawsuits in all 3 states, challenging these laws on behalf of multi-faith and non-religious parents and children, Christians, Jews, Hindus, Unitarian Universalists, atheists, non-religious families. We explain to the courts why these displays violate all of their religious freedom. So let's be clear, families, right, families, not politicians, should decide if, how, and when children engage with religion. Bible in schools, so pillar number 3. Americans United is already currently in court in Oklahoma blocking the Bible mandate there, and we're working with allies in Texas to encourage school districts there not to implement the optional elementary school curricula. It's the Bluebonnet curricula, which teaches the Bible. Of course, you can teach the Bible as part of literature, art, world history, comparative religion, etc., but that is not what Christian nationalists are going for. They want to teach the Bible as truth and promote the myth that it is a part of core American values. Prayer in schools. Just this past week, at a meeting of Trump's so-called Religious Liberty Commission, Trump announced his administration will be issuing new school prayer guidance. If the guidance is similar to the one issued during his first term, we expect that it will invite religious coercion into our public schools, which could lead to teachers praying with students proselytizing classmates, and the bullying, harassment, and ostracization of LGBTQ+ and non-religious and students from religious minorities. Please believe me that there are so many more attacks on secular and inclusive public education in our schools all across the country and in some of the states that I've mentioned, but these are just some of the examples that would fit into my presentation today. So, where do we go, right? So, Moises, you're bringing us all down. This is super depressing. What can we do about it? And I'm really excited about the separation of church and state. I don't know if you are. I know it sort of feels like this archaic and abstract principle, but as an immigrant to this country, I was incredibly proud to know that the separation of church and state is a foundational American principle. The first country in the world to enact something like this was the United States. So our democracy can survive a second Trump administration and this rising tide of Christian nationalism because Christian nationalism is unpopular, right? It's sort of, we've seen it's been sort of like kryptonite to politicians, especially last year. I don't know if you remember, but a lot of them tried to distance themselves from Project 2025, which you heard Liz and Gabe talk about whenever that started to catch more mainstream media attention. The majority of Americans don't want Christian nationalism, and they don't want Project 2025. Church-state separation is the cure for Christian nationalism and the shield that protects our democracy. So when we follow church-state separation as promised in our Constitution, it stops Christian nationalists from codifying their agenda in our laws, because church-state separation means the government cannot favor any religion over any other or over non-religion. Church-state separation stops Christian nationalists from using the machinery of the state, including in public schools, to create insiders and outsiders. Church-state separation is baked into the First Amendment's religion clauses and Article 6 of the Constitution. Church-state separation protects religious freedom for all. From the most devout believer to the atheist, church-state separation protects your right to live as yourself and believe as you choose. It gives you the right to love who you want, to seek reproductive care, to read and learn as you wish. And church-state separation stops division. So we believe that the framers of our Constitution understood that a pluralistic democracy in which the government depends on understanding and compromise to function, religion endorsed by the government would divide. That's one of the reasons they chose to separate church and state, and we have taken church-state separation for granted for way too long. And the emboldened Christian nationalist movement we currently see is the result. It is time for a national recommitment to church-state separation before it's too late. So the path forward. Calls to action, CTAs, if you're in the movement. Here's what all of us can do to counter this threat over the next 4 years and beyond, and I'll cover briefly some of these points. But it's come together, play the long game, and include youth, connect the dots, hold on to hope. Let me talk about this first. So we must come together and work hard at it. And when I say coming together, I mean not just bonding or bridging with those that are already part of your community, but bridging divides and finding those who aren't already part of your community to join hands with. From AU's clients to our supporters to our faith advocacy and advisory council, our staff and our board of trustees, we are intentional about including people of all religions and none. We must come together if we are to prevail. The threats that we individually face have one common source. Just as a wide cross-section of ultra-conservative and Christian nationalist groups join together to construct Project 2025, we need to construct a large enough resistance to fight them. And that's why I want to talk a little bit today about SURF. So that's why Americans United began hosting the Summit for Religious Freedom 3 years ago. SURF brings leading activists together for an empowering few days in which we learn, network, and feel our power as a movement. Last year, our conference, we welcomed people from all 50 states, equally religious and non-religious, ranging across all ages, from diverse races, sexual orientations, gender identities. The feeling in that room was like being with family. Honestly, it was incredible. And that is also when it became incredibly obvious to me and it became undeniable that we are the majority. I hope that you will join us in April of 2026, April 25th through the 27th of 2026. That's the website, thesurf.org. There, you can either attend in person or virtually. We give tons of scholarships for students, especially in youth who want to become more involved or learn more about these issues. I would recommend them to go to thesurf.org. We must connect the dots. So we must educate, we must build power, we must invite youth. We church-state separation can come across sort of as an abstract or even archaic or outdated concept that people don't necessarily think it affects their daily lives, but it does. So to resonate with younger people and attract a diversity of people, we must connect the dots between church-state separation and other critical issues that depend on it. So if you are for abortion rights, LGBTQ equality, inclusive secular public schools that teach accurate science and history, the right to read and learn, then you need to support church-state separation. And that's just a few. We need to play the long game. We need to build local and state power, and that's exactly what you are doing here today. So we're going to organize, we're going to message in ways and build power in ways that we haven't done before. And at AU, we're doing it from Texas to New York, from Minnesota to Kansas, from Florida to Washington. Youth. We are also looking to the future and investing in our youth through programs that bring together and train law students, emerging advocates to be the next generation of leaders on church-state separation issues, as well as other civil rights issues of our time. So we have, again, several programs. If you know of a youth or know of someone who would be interested, we have youth organizing fellows. Those are open 2 to 3 times per year, and it's a paid fellowship. We have the Legal Academy, which is for law students, and we also have dozens of scholarships for students and low-income folks to be able to attend SURF either virtually or in person. So we need to keep hope alive. I know we've been living through a period of despair, and I feel it. I know it can be incredibly difficult. It's been a very rough time, but we are never going to win if we don't believe in the power of our collective voices and if we don't believe that it's possible to win. Reaching out to those who aren't part of your daily life, making invitations is incredibly important. For me, it's beginning to have these conversations with Spanish language communities. Who can I invite from my own immigrant and Spanish language background to have these conversations, to introduce these concepts that oftentimes, right in Latin American countries, they may not exist. We can win because we have the power of the people and our country's DNA and Constitution on our side. Remember that Christian nationalists' ideas and their ideology are unpopular. That's why they need to be funded by billionaires. That's why they are spreading lies. That's why they seek to indoctrinate and need to capture the courts. They want supremacy, and we want equality. That's our message, and that is powerful. And that's the power of church-state separation. That's the power of fighting for freedom without favor and equality without exception. That's why in a country divided, we are Americans united. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. It's really good to see the crowd here. My name is Jim Beglin, and I'm one of the founders of Hoosiers. So it's my privilege to introduce our next speaker. I'll try to introduce her without taking too much of her talking time away from her. It would be easy to focus a lot on her biography, but I'm going to hit only a few of the highlights. Sheila graduated from Anderson High School at age 16 and then received a degree from Stevens College for Women in 1960. One of her early jobs was selling used cars at the Cadillac Rambler dealership in Anderson. So a lot of her talking skills were acquired very early in life. Sheila got her undergraduate degree from IU Bloomington and taught high school English. Then in her 30s, with 3 children, she went back to law school at IU in Indianapolis, my alma mater. Sheila practiced law at Baker & Daniels for 3 years and then went on to serve as corporation counsel for the city of Indianapolis. In 1980, Sheila ran unsuccessfully for Congress as a Republican, going up against Andy Jacobs. 1980 was a time when Democrats were still legal in Indiana. Sheila went on to serve as executive director of the ICLU, which is now the ACLU of Indiana, and she gradually lost her Republican stripes in that process. In 1998, she joined the IU Indianapolis faculty as a professor of law and public policy, retiring in 2015. In her spare time, Sheila has authored 10 books, and she writes a daily blog called A Jaundiced Look at the World We Live In. If you do not already follow her blog, you probably will after you hear her speak. So please welcome Sheila Kennedy to Fort Wayne.
It's very kind. It's been a while since anybody mentioned the car sales thing. You want a red car? Here's a red car. You want a car? Never mind. Okay. I've been asked today to discuss the multiple ways in which Christian nationalism is inconsistent with America's founding documents, especially the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights. You know, it's always a good idea to define our terms, so let me begin by reiterating what you've already heard, the basic premises of Christian nationalism, which is a political movement that my friends in the Christian clergy assure me is anything but authentically Christian. Christian nationalism begins with the ahistorical insistence that the United States was founded as a Christian nation and that one must be a Christian, or let's be honest here, a white Christian, in order to be a true American. Christian nationalists reject church-state separation and believe that civil government should impose their version of Christian behavior on all American citizens. And of course, that would entail, at a minimum, banning abortion, rejecting same-sex marriage, or again, let's be honest, criminalizing homosexuality, and reinstating patriarchy. Virtually every tenet of Christian nationalism is diametrically opposed to the philosophy of the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights. I'm not going to spend time today explaining how the movement distorts and mischaracterizes either Christianity or the actual history of this country. Others will do that. What I will do is compare and contrast some of the foundational provisions of America's constituent documents, and especially the Bill of Rights, documents that reflect what I call the American idea, with the absolutely contrary premises of Christian nationalism. So what do I mean when I talk about the American idea? What is that idea? And what were its political and philosophical roots? Where did our constitutional system come from, and how did it differ from prior beliefs about the nature of government and authority? Answering those questions does require a visit to the history of America. You know, a while back, I was doing research for one of my books, and I came across what I think was a very illuminating explanation of the stark differences between the original settlers who came to this country, those the scholar who wrote it called the planting fathers, and the men who would later draft our legal system, the men we call the founding fathers. As he pointed out, the Puritans and Pilgrims who first came to America defined liberty, including religious liberty, as freedom to do the right thing, including, of course, freedom to worship and obey the right God in the true church, and to use the power of government to make sure your neighbors did too. The founders who crafted our Constitution some 150 years later were products of the intervening Enlightenment, and they had accepted its dramatically different definition of liberty. Enlightenment philosophers defined liberty as personal autonomy, an individual's right to make his or her own moral and political decisions free of government coercion. In the Enlightenment's libertarian construction, liberty meant freedom to do your own thing, subject only to two very important caveats. You could do your own thing so long as you did not thereby harm the person or property of somebody else, and so long as you recognized the equal right of other people to do their own thing. The U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights were firmly grounded in the Enlightenment understanding of liberty. It's also important to understand that as a result, America's constitutional system is largely based on a concept we call negative liberty. The founders believed that our individual rights don't come from some gracious grant by government. Rather, those rights are natural, meaning that we're entitled to certain basic rights simply by virtue of being human, hence the term human rights. And that a legitimate government is obligated to respect and protect those natural rights. Now, if you think about it, the Bill of Rights is essentially a list of things that government, the state, is forbidden to do. For example, the state cannot prescribe our religious or political beliefs. It cannot search us without probable cause until the last never mind. I cry a lot. It cannot search us without probable cause. It cannot censor our expression. And it's forbidden from doing such things even when popular majorities might favor those actions. The concept of a limited and constrained government is absolutely antithetical to Christian nationalism, which seeks to use the power of the state to compel behaviors consistent with their version of Christianity. Robert P. Jones, chief executive of the Public Religion Research Institute, is among the many scholars who've described why that Christian nationalist approach is inconsistent with the American system. He wrote that, and I quote, "A worldview that claims God as a political partisan and dehumanizes one's political opponents as evil is fundamentally anti-democratic and a mindset that believes that our nation was divinely ordained to be a promised land for Christians of European descent is incompatible with the U.S. Constitution's guarantee of freedom of religion and equality for all," unquote. The founders' view of freedom of religion is incorporated in the First Amendment, which protects religious liberty through the establishment and free exercise clauses that, operating together, require separation of church and state. Now, the fundamentalists will love to point out that the actual phrase separation of church and state does not appear in the text of the First Amendment. What they prefer to ignore is that the phrase refers to the way in which the First Amendment's two religion clauses operate. However, the concept of church-state separation and that language had long preceded its incorporation into the First Amendment. The first documented use of the actual phrase was by Roger Williams, founder of Rhode Island, and well before the Revolutionary War. The most famous use, as most of you know, was that of Thomas Jefferson. When Jefferson was president, a group of Danbury Baptists wrote to him asking for an official interpretation of the First Amendment's religion clauses. Jefferson's response was that the Establishment Clause and Free Exercise Clause were intended to erect a wall of separation between government and religion. What is less often noted when that story is told is that since Jefferson's response was official, it was duly confirmed by the then serving U.S. Attorney General before it was transmitted to the Danbury Baptists. Historians tell us that the Establishment Clause went through more than 20 drafts, with the founders rejecting formulations like "there shall be no national church" as inadequate to their intent. The Establishment Clause prohibits the government from making any law respecting an establishment of religion. And the courts have uniformly held that this language not only forbids the government from establishing an official religion or state church, but it also prohibits government actions that endorse or sponsor religion, favor one religion over another, or that prefer religion to non-religion, or for that matter, non-religion to religion. In other words, I used to tell my students, government's just supposed to butt out of your soul. Meanwhile, the Free Exercise Clause prohibits government from interfering with the free exercise of religion. That protects the right of Americans to choose our own beliefs and to express those beliefs without fear of state disapproval. Read together, the Free Exercise Clause and the Establishment Clause require government neutrality in matters of religion. The religion clauses prohibit government from either benefiting or burdening religious belief. One way to think about the operation of the religion clauses is that the Establishment Clause forbids the public sector, that is government, from either favoring or disfavoring religion, and the Free Exercise Clause forbids government from interfering with the expression of religious beliefs in the public square. The public square, of course, is the myriad non-governmental venues where citizens exchange ideas and opinions. When states misuse their authority and play favorites, when they privilege some religious beliefs over others, people who do not share those privileged beliefs are relegated to the status of second-class citizens. Separation of church and state prevents adherents of majority religions from using government to force their beliefs or practices on others. And it keeps the agencies of government from interfering with the internal operations of churches, synagogues, and mosques. As to that original purpose of neutrality, I have come across few explanations better than one offered by John Leland. Now, Leland lived from 1754 to 1851. He was an evangelical Baptist preacher who had very strong opinions on the individual's relationship to God, the inviolability of the individual conscience, and the limited nature of human knowledge. He wrote, and I quote, "Religion is a matter between God and individuals. Religious opinions of men not being the objects of civil government, nor in any way under its control, government has no more to do with the religious opinions of men than it has with the principles of mathematics." Of course, Leland could hardly have anticipated our current government's belief that it does have the right to interfere with the principles of mathematics and statistics. But that is a scary subject for a different speech. The bottom line is, we Americans live in a diverse society where different religions have dramatically different beliefs about the matters Christian nationalists want government to dictate. For example, in several traditions, including my own, abortion is permissible. Nevertheless, here in Indiana, where our legislators routinely ignore the official neutrality required by the First Amendment, as well as other aspects of the Bill of Rights, lawmakers have passed a law that imposes a belief held by some religious denominations on members of denominations and faith traditions that don't share those religious beliefs. It would be, I think, a serious mistake to think that Christian nationalism is only inconsistent with the First Amendment. The racism and misogyny that is built into it also run afoul of the 14th Amendment's equal protection guarantees. The constitutional requirement of equal protection is intended to prevent majorities, or in this case, activist minorities, from using the government to disadvantage individuals and minorities of whom they disapprove. Essentially, the Equal Protection Clause requires government to treat citizens as individuals and not as members of groups. In the United States, our laws are supposed to be based upon a person's civic behavior, not on gender, race, or other markers of identity. So long as we citizens obey the laws, pay our taxes, and generally conduct ourselves in a way that does not endanger or disadvantage others, we're entitled to full equality with other citizens. That guarantee of equal civil rights is one of the aspects of American life that has been most admired around the globe. It has unleashed the productivity of previously marginalized groups, and it's contributed significantly to American prosperity. Christian nationalism strikes at the very heart of that commitment to civil equality. It would privilege certain citizens over others based solely on their skin color and religious identity. And it's really hard to think of anything that's more anti-American than that. The conflict of Christian nationalism with the Constitution and Bill of Rights isn't limited to the First and 14th Amendment. There's another incredibly important principle embedded in the Bill of Rights that we're already in danger of losing to the sustained assault of these pseudo-religious fanatics. The doctrine of substantive due process, often called the right to privacy or the right to personal autonomy. I absolutely agree with the numerous constitutional scholars who argue that although the right to personal autonomy is, or self-government, if you want to call it that, is not explicitly mentioned, the principle is absolutely inherent in the Bill of Rights. That's because it's impossible to give content to the rights that are specifically enumerated unless we recognize that doctrine of substantive due process. And that impossibility was expressly recognized by the Supreme Court in 1965 in a case called Griswold versus Connecticut. Connecticut's legislature had passed a law prohibiting the use of birth control by married couples. The legislation prohibited doctors from prescribing contraceptives and prohibited pharmacists from filling those prescriptions. The Supreme Court struck the law down, holding that whether a couple uses contraceptives simply wasn't any of government's business. If you'll excuse an editorial, it was a better court. Anyway, that was not a decision that government was entitled to make. What the court recognized was that an individual right to personal autonomy, a right to self-government, is absolutely essential to the enforcement of the other provisions of the Bill of Rights. Justices White and Harlan found explicit confirmation of it in the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, which is where the terminology substantive due process comes from. Wherever it resided, in a penumbra or in the 9th or 14th Amendment, the justices agreed on both its presence and importance. What the doctrine of substantive due process does is draw a line between decisions that government has the legitimate authority to make and decisions which in our system must be left up to the individual. I used to tell my students that the Bill of Rights is essentially a list of things that government is forbidden to decide. What books you read, what opinions you form, what prayers you say or don't. Such matters are far outside the legitimate role of government. The issue isn't whether that book is dangerous or inappropriate, or that religion is false, or whether you should marry somebody of the same sex, or whether you should procreate. The issue is who gets to make that decision, the individual or the government? Allowing any unit of government to decide such matters violates the most fundamental premise of the Bill of Rights and the philosophy that underlies our constitutional system. And that is precisely what Christian nationalists want. Let me be clear. Government has the right, indeed it has the obligation, to intervene when a person's behaviors are harming people who haven't consented to that harm. Mask mandates to protect public health, or requirements that students be vaccinated before entering a public school classroom are examples. Otherwise, in a constitutional system devised by the founders, the government must leave us alone. For a long time, secular and religiously tolerant Americans dismissed warnings about the growing fundamentalist assaults on that principle. We were confident that the right to self-determination was secure. The conservative Christian reasoning in Dobbs, the case that overturned Roe v. Wade, justified an invasion of that personal liberty, and it was shocking. For the first time in American history, a Supreme Court had withdrawn a constitutional right that had been considered settled for over 50 years. As polarizing as that decision was, and it was, there's still very little understanding of its scope and the fact that it threatens far more than the health, well-being, and self-determination of American women, which it clearly does. In this country, different religions and different denominations within those religions have very different beliefs about the status of women and about procreation. What amounts to the Supreme Court's elevation of a particular version of Christianity has understandably engendered an enormous and a very negative reaction. A majority of Americans, including a majority of religiously affiliated Americans, disagree with the court's decision and are even more opposed to emerging efforts to make access to contraception difficult or impossible. What's still not fully appreciated, however, is the fact that Dobbs was more than just an effort to force women to give birth. It was a devastating assault on the American definition of individual liberty, a definition which draws a line between legitimate and illegitimate government action. If there's no right to privacy, no substantive due process guarantee, if government can force women to give birth, government can move to make interracial or same-sex marriages illegal. It can outlaw birth control. It can forbid divorce. In short, it can decide those intimate matters that the founders and former Supreme Court decisions protected against government overreach. Okay, so far my discussion of these issues has been necessarily abstract, a discussion of principles. Let me just conclude by reminding you of the challenge we face right here in Indiana, where we have statewide officials who are self-identified Christian nationalists and who demonstrate daily that they neither understand nor respect the Constitution. The most obvious example is our Lieutenant Governor, Micah Beckwith, who has pushed the racist white replacement theory, compared vaccination policies to Nazi Germany's treatment of the Jews, advocated that brown people crossing the border be shot, and accused the Indy Star, members of the left, and Methodist and Lutheran ministers of wanting to cut off the private parts of children. Yes, he's insane, but when he served briefly on a library board, he tried to censor and remove books of which he disapproved, and he constantly engages in ugly diatribes against gay citizens. Most recently, at least most recently when I wrote this, one knows not what's going on today, he claimed that undocumented immigrants aren't entitled to due process. I'm not quite sure how we're supposed to know that they're undocumented immigrants if we don't give them due process, but Todd Rokita, Indiana's very embarrassing attorney general, has hounded and harassed a doctor who legally aborted a 10-year-old rape victim and is engaged in a wide-ranging vendetta to root out efforts to foster racial and religious inclusion. I'm not going to go through Jim Banks' numerous assaults on the American idea, since as Fort Wayne residents, you are undoubtedly already familiar with them. These men are so busy pursuing a Christian nationalist culture war, they don't have a whole lot of time to attend to the duties of their office. They provide an excellent example, however, of what government would be like in a country run by Christian nationalists, also known as the Christian Taliban. A country in the thrall of a Christian nationalist worldview would look nothing like the America that most of us love and want to protect. We live in a dangerous time, but we cannot give in to fear and reaction. I tell myself that every morning. And we absolutely cannot allow Christian nationalists, white supremacists, and other assorted bigots to jettison the legal system that has fostered American progress and been a beacon to oppressed people all over the world. Throughout our history, America has had to reckon with significant numbers of people who never accepted the premises of the system devised by the founders. There have always been the Puritans who, like the planting fathers, believed that they should be able to use government to control the lives and behaviors of everyone else. Throughout our history, we've always had to deal with America's original sin of racism. We've had dark times. It wasn't just the Civil War. I'm only one of the many older people in this room. I'm probably the oldest person in this room, who've lived through the civil rights movement, the women's liberation movement, the gay rights movement. American liberty has always been a work in progress and has always been frantically resisted by those who felt threatened and disoriented by social change. That said, the country has moved, granted in fits and starts, toward realizing the ideals of liberty and civic equality that were set out in our constituent documents. You know, because I am old, I often think of a folk song that was popular during the great upheavals of the 1960s. It was sung by Peter, Paul, and Mary, and the chorus was, "Don't let the light go out." That should be our motto as we face this latest eruption of deeply un-American challenges from people who are threatened by diversity and dead set against equality and inclusion. Don't let the light go out. Thank you.
I hope no one was disappointed with that. We're going to thank you, Sheila. Thank you for coming to Fort Wayne and delivering your message. We really appreciate it.
I should introduce myself. I'm Mark Beck, and I am part of the steering committee for Hoosiers for the separation of church and state. Sometime back, and especially in the past few months, my life partner, Barb, and I realized that we needed to broaden our community in our concern for this country. This gathering is a great example of broadening that community and sharing those concerns. I hope we can keep this up. We've got a long road ahead. Our next speaker, Dr. Daniel Ulrich, is a professor of New Testament studies at Bethany Theological Seminary, Richmond, Indiana, where he has taught since 1996. He earned a PhD in biblical studies at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Richmond, Virginia in '97, with a dissertation entitled True Greatness, Matthew 18 in its literary context. His more recent work as an author and speaker is focused on the significance of gospel narratives for contemporary concerns, including just peacemaking, bridging political divisions, welcoming immigrants, and caring for the environment. Dan is an ordained minister in the Church of the Brethren and a member of the Beacon Heights congregation in Fort Wayne, where his spouse, Reverend Paula Ulrich, serves as co-pastor. He enjoys swimming, exercise, playing bridge and kayaking on Fort Wayne rivers, and taking walks with Paula. Please welcome Professor Ulrich.
Thank you, Mark. I am grateful to Hoosiers for separation of church and state, and to each of you for giving me the opportunity to address you in this timely forum. I especially want to thank the Planning Committee for taking the risk of inviting a Christian biblical scholar to speak about Christian nationalism. I brought a Bible, but not as a weapon, I promise. I value the religious diversity of this forum. If I occasionally refer to Christians as we, it's because I include myself in that category, not because of any presumption that others here are Christians. Likewise, I don't assume that everyone here is familiar with the Bible, although I respectfully suggest that some knowledge of its contents could be a valuable background for anyone working against Christian nationalism. If you're interested in courses, come see me. We'll talk about it. The title of this talk has a double meaning. I believe that Christian nationalism dangerously distorts or ignores the teachings of Jesus. So I intend to make a case against it based on my reading of the Bible. In addition, I hope that the Bible will offer us some wisdom about how best to respond to neighbors who've been led astray by Christian nationalism. The title of this talk has two main parts. I'll discuss the bad news of Christian nationalism first, before sampling the good news taught by Jesus. The contrast between them will be stark, despite the many claims to biblical authority made by proponents of Christian nationalism. After all, it's one thing to display the Bible as a symbol of authority. It's another to study it as a guide for following Jesus more faithfully. Since the meaning of Christian nationalism is disputed, though not here, I think, I want to share two definitions, one by an opponent and the other by a proponent. Amanda Tyler is the lead organizer of Christians Against Christian Nationalism. In her excellent book, she writes, "Christian nationalism is a political ideology and cultural framework that seeks to fuse American and Christian identities. It suggests that real Americans are Christians and that true Christians hold a particular set of political beliefs. It seeks to create a society in which only this narrow subset of Americans is privileged by law and in social practice, societal practice." By now, that sounds pretty familiar. One that isn't so familiar, perhaps. Meanwhile, in the case for Christian nationalism, Stephen Wolfe writes,
quote, Christian nationalism is a totality of national action consisting of civil laws and social customs conducted by a Christian nation as a Christian nation in order to procure for itself both earthly and heavenly good in Christ. This national pursuit of earthly and heavenly good might seem benign enough until you get into the weeds of what Wolf considers good. His ideal nation has much in common with the Puritanism of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which he admires as a scholar of early Calvinism. Wolf believes that each nation would be better off with only one culture. That way we could all agree. He does not explain how a nation as large and diverse as the United States could achieve the desired homogeneity. But he argues that nations should exercise their natural right to exclude alien influences. I don't know if there are any natural rights applying to nations. I only heard them applied to individuals in our tradition, but he thinks nations have natural rights. Wolf would concentrate political power in the hands of a Christian prince, his word. This prince would support the true religion, his Calvinism. The prince would tolerate heretics only so long as they did not express their views publicly. You have freedom of conscience, but it's kind of like don't ask, don't tell. Open heresy would be, quote, suppressed, although Wolf does not specify how. The masculine gender of the term prince is not accidental. Wolf decries America's current gynocracy, meaning rule by women. He doesn't claim that women hold every position of power, but he complains that feminine virtues like empathy are prized, while, quote, male aggression in reserve is pathologized, unquote. As I read between Wolf's lines, I sense a great deal of the fear and anger we've been talking about. He is angry at losing privilege as a white, straight Protestant man, and he fears further losses. His defense of privilege inadvertently confirms the truth of Tyler's definition. If Wolf were to visit the campus where I teach, I'd invite him to sit with me near this statue of Mary Dyer. In 1660, Massachusetts Puritans hung Dyer in Boston Commons because they viewed her Quaker testimony as a dangerous heresy. They were especially threatened by her persistent declarations that all people have the light of God within them, and that women are just as gifted for ministry as men. They deported her 3 times. 3 times she courageously came back to share her message, and then she was hung. I'd like to ask Wolf how his political philosophy differs from the one that killed Dyer. Since Wolf is especially interested in getting people to heaven, I might also ask him how his segregated nations would prepare people to enjoy the heaven that John envisioned, a place where people of every nation, tribe, and language, a vast multitude of diverse people serve God together. See Revelation 7:9. Finally, I'd like to tell Wolf that my vision for earthly good includes robust democracy in a diverse, welcoming nation with equal rights and freedoms for everyone. That vision would entail significant losses of privilege for Wolf and for me. But relinquishing unjust privilege is exactly the kind of repentance that God asks from us. I feel led to pray for Wolf, but not to ignore the danger that his philosophy represents. If he gets his way, our First Amendment freedoms would be toast. Any religious or cultural division that the prince rejects could be grounds for deportation or worse. In a nation with many wolves, I might say wolves in sheep's clothing, but that's another scripture. In a nation with many wolves, we need to respond with the courage and the persistence of Mary Dyer. Sociologists Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry have analyzed extensive survey data in 2020 and found that about 52% of Americans were either ambassadors or accommodators of Christian nationalism. They get a different percentage than another survey that was cited because they'd asked different questions. People are a little more, I think, willing to say yes to their questions. I cite their study because it supports the hypothesis that the fear of losing privilege helps to motivate those groups. They wrote, "More and more Americans collectively agree that the United States should not favor Christianity formally. Consequently, the sizable portion of Americans who pine for Christianity's former prominence in American civil life feel threatened and marginalized." Some believers in Christian nationalism also feel persecuted. But let's draw a clear distinction between persecution and the loss of privilege. The Pew Research Center documents real persecution of Christians, Muslims, Jews, and other religious groups in many parts of the world. Loss of privilege is something else. When American Christians can no longer assume that our ways of praying and celebrating will be predominant in an increasingly secular society, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself, that is a loss of privilege. The same is true when public schools no longer endorse our religion. Traditional families may feel a loss of privilege when the government treats all marriages equally, regardless of gender. Again, that's not persecution. I don't wish to stereotype anyone as a fearful defender of unjust privileges. Each of us has a unique mixture of motives, hopes, and fears, and that includes people we might label as Christian nationalists. Nevertheless, fears of losing privilege are common enough that politicians can use them and stoke them to gain power. This strategy is not new or unique to America. I will not take time, and I lack the expertise, to review the horrific history of nationalist dictators who have gained support from Christians by promising to protect them from demonized others. History never repeats itself exactly, but there's enough of a pattern to raise alarms when someone like Viktor Orbán gains control over every Hungarian institution that could check his power. Orbán's method has been to stoke fears that immigrants are a threat to Hungary's Christian character. He has also capitalized on Christians' fears of LGBTQ+ communities, and some of his admirers are following a similar playbook here. They're very explicit in their admiration. Fear of losing privilege is not the only emotional driver of Christian nationalism, however. This hasn't been discussed, but I would like to mention the more positive emotion of love for one's country. I love my country. Sometimes I criticize it, but I do so out of love with the hope that we can do better. Healthy love for one's country can be an aspect of loving one's neighbors. When taken to an extreme, however, love of country can be idolatrous from a biblical perspective, meaning that it can compete with the devotion that Christians owe exclusively to God. Nationalist idolatry can make people less able to recognize the faults of their nation and to work for improvement. Recognizing nationalist idolatry may be easier when the nation being worshiped is not our own. Consider these words that British lyricist A.C. Benson published in 1902. They go to the tune Pomp and Circumstance, but I'll spare you the singing of it. Land of hope and glory, mother of the free, how shall we extol thee, who are born of thee? Wider still and wider shall thy bounds be set. God, who made thee mighty, make thee mightier yet. This hymn is addressed to the personified British Empire, which it praises profusely with no hint of the suffering caused by colonial conquests and exploitation. The hymn treats God as a mere agent for empowering and expanding the empire. I call that idolatry. Another example hits closer to home. Stand for the flag, kneel for the cross began as a response to NFL players who quietly knelt during the national anthem to protest police brutality against black lives. Many variations of this theme are available for sale on T-shirts, etc. I'm glad we don't have any outside. So what's wrong with it? For starters, it dismisses the NFL player's witness as if acknowledging racism is unpatriotic. It also ignores the fact that many patriotic Americans are not Christians. The American flag does not and should not include a religious symbol because, as we have heard, we do not have a state-sponsored religion. Other nations do, and they have crosses or whatever on their flags, but we don't. Finally, the meme suggests that the cross and the flag require similar devotion, just with different gestures. Stand for one, kneel for the other. The crucial question for American Christians, in my view, is not whether we stand or kneel for worship. The question is, whom or what are we worshiping? If we find ourselves worshiping the flag, or a nation, or a God who only blesses America, our love of country has become idolatrous. I have suggested that both fear and love help to fuel Christian nationalism. Some deep emotions like these rarely yield to rational arguments. We have to touch people at a deeper level than just the mind. I do hope, however, that some teachings of Jesus can touch the hearts and minds of fellow believers who may have been led astray by Christian nationalism or who might be led astray in the future. As we prepare to sample some relevant biblical texts, I need to acknowledge that the Bible is more than one book. It is a collection of texts composed over many centuries by communities that narrated, sang, and debated their experiences of God. To cite just one example of a debate, the book of Ezra, chapters 9 and 10, reports a decision that men who had married foreign wives should divorce them to guard against idolatry and keep Israel pure. That was Ezra's policy. The book of Ruth gives a disarming response to that policy. In effect, it says, wait a minute, remember Ruth, the faithful Moabite who married Boaz of Bethlehem and became the great-grandmother of King David? Would you rather she be divorced? So there are debates within the Bible, and for millennia, there have been debates between readers of the Bible. Christians come to the Bible with different questions and concerns, and whether we admit it or not, we tend to prioritize some biblical texts over others. My approach is to prioritize the teachings of Jesus, as remembered in the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm far from perfect in following those teachings, I readily admit, but I do find that they help me understand and practice the rest of the Bible in life-giving ways. There are many examples of Jesus himself prioritizing some biblical texts over others. According to Mark 12, someone asked him, which is the greatest commandment in the law of Moses? He chose the Shema from Deuteronomy 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. That's how Mark quotes it, which is a little different than Deuteronomy. Jesus went on to name a second great commandment in the same passage in Mark. You shall love your neighbor as you love yourself, from Leviticus 19:18. When criticized for eating with sinners and healing on the Sabbath, Jesus quoted Hosea 6:6. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Of course, sacrifice is all over Scripture, but Jesus prefers mercy, or quotes God as saying he prefers mercy. Jesus supported the law that God's people should give a tenth of their produce as an offering back to God. However, he had sharp words for people who counted out a tenth of their cumin seeds, but neglected the weightier matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faith. Love, mercy, justice, and faith. These are the weightier matters that outweigh some of the laws. With humor that would make a political cartoonist proud, Jesus accused the cumin counters of straining out a gnat, but swallowing a camel. A contemporary example would be straining at the possibility that transgender women might have an advantage in women's sports, but swallowing the deportation of immigrants to brutal prisons far from their home countries with no due process. In keeping with Jesus' priorities, let's focus now on sayings related to the greatest commandment. Love God with all your heart and with all your soul and all your might. Jesus supported this command by giving his listeners reasons to love God in spite of the injustices they were experiencing under Roman occupation. At the start of Jesus' ministry, in about 27 CE, the prophet John had been arrested by Herod Antipas, who ruled on behalf of Rome and shared his father's propensity for executing potential rivals. Into that desperate situation, Jesus brought a message of hope, which Mark summarizes as follows. Jesus came to Galilee, proclaiming the good news of God, and saying, the time is fulfilled, and the reign of God has come near. Repent and trust in the good news. This message has deep roots in Israel's prophetic tradition. It specifically echoes Isaiah 52:7. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of the messenger who announces peace, who brings good news, who announces salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. The word translated peace here is shalom, which is more than just the absence of violence. It is the presence of justice, well-being, integrity, even health, and yes, prosperity in the sense of everyone having enough. It's closely related to salvation, which in the Bible is not just spiritual. In fact, most uses of that term refer to physical rescue from enemies or illness. When Isaiah says, your God reigns, it involves action. It is the act of God as a ruler of the universe. Like your God reigns, Jesus' phrase, the reign of God, is action-oriented. The reign of God does not describe a place or a group of people. It is God's way of acting for the purpose of bringing salvation and shalom to the world. God's reign is not limited to any nation, nor to the church, since God rules over all creation. Like Israel's earlier prophets, Jesus called for repentance and trust in response to God's reign. Repentance includes turning away from idols so that one's love for God has no competitors. Jesus made this point especially clear in his teaching about wealth, which he personified as an idol named Mammon. According to Luke, Jesus warned, no slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and Mammon. That passage is not quoted often in prosperity gospel churches. The same logic applies if the idol in question is a nation. Another passage that directs love toward God instead of idols may seem to support nationalism. According to Luke 20, Jesus was teaching in the temple when the chief priests sent spies to trap him with this question: is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Their trap was ingenious. If Jesus answered, yes, pay taxes to Caesar, then he would lose popularity with all the people that were losing their farms, going into debt, and even into debt slavery because of the weight of those taxes. In other words, he'd lose the popularity that was protecting him in Jerusalem from arrest. On the other hand, if he said, no, refuse to pay, then the spies would have grounds to denounce him before the Roman governor as an insurrectionist. The chief priests and the governor both shared an interest in keeping order at the temple, so they would have arrested him. Jesus, however, turned the tables by asking the spies to show him a denarius, a silver coin used to pay Roman taxes. Here's an example. The inscription, Caesar Augustus Tiberius, son of the divine Augustus, was idolatrous from a Jewish perspective, naming the sitting Roman emperor not as a god himself, although he would later be divinized, but as the son of a god, the divinized Augustus. This inscription was indeed idolatrous. Pilgrims had to change their money in order to avoid bringing such coins into the temple courts. So the spies' possession of a denarius there would have been embarrassing. So after catching them red-handed and calling attention to Caesar's image and inscription, Jesus said, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. In Jesus' Jewish tradition, everything belongs to God, so it is unlikely that he meant to set up dual tracks of loyalty and devotion, as in obey God in spiritual things, obey Caesar in material things, in other words, everything else. More likely, he meant that people who love God with their whole selves are free to hand over idolatrous coins when Caesar demands them. Money has no grip on their hearts. Just as the love of a nation and the love of money can compete with love of God, the same is true of the desire for privilege and power over others. In Matthew 20, the Zebedee brothers, James and John, seek places of special privilege to the left and right of Jesus. The other 10 male disciples are understandably upset at this attempt at one-upmanship, so Jesus teaches them all. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. It will not be so among you, but whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be your slave. The phrase Son of Man in this context is equivalent to the pronoun I. So I'll translate, just as I came, not to be served, but to serve, and to give my life as a ransom for many. The passage is not Jesus' first attempt to teach the male disciples to give up privilege. There is a similar teaching about accepting the low status of a child just 2 chapters in Matthew 18. Jesus puts a child in the midst of the status-seeking grown-ups and tells them that unless they become lowly like this child, they will not enter the reign of heaven. It's not talking about a humble attitude. It's talking about low status. The male disciples seem to have a hard time grasping this point. The Gospels do not tell us why Jesus chose 12 men as apostles. Some Christians have inferred that Jesus wanted only men to lead the church. But I would like to propose a different explanation. Jesus probably chose to spend more time with 12 men because he knew they needed extra instruction on relinquishing privilege and serving others. Jesus' female followers didn't need that help because they had been socialized all their lives to serve. Notice his teaching about relinquishing privilege is directed at the people who had the most privilege among his followers. The same would be true of Christians who seek dominion over others based on their religious identity. I'm sorry, I skipped a sentence. Men who attempt to silence and subordinate women today have missed the point again. Let me say that again. Men who attempt to silence or subordinate a woman today have missed Jesus' point again. And the same would be true of Christians who seek dominion over others based on their religious identity. Christians can face our fears of losing privilege if we have learned to trust and love the God whose reign will bring peace to all creation, including us. When a loving relationship with God is restored, we can experience the joy of being used by God for a purpose larger than ourselves and our nation. A loving relationship with God also opens the way for people to obey the second greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. These loves don't compete. Self-love and the love of God make the love of neighbors sustainable, while the love of neighbors makes the love of God visible. In one of Jesus' most famous parables, a compassionate Samaritan tends to the needs of a man who has been beaten, robbed, and left for dead on the steep road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Most of the people on that road would have been Judeans who had a long history of hostility toward Samaritans. The Samaritan in the parable, however, becomes a neighbor to his nation's enemy. And Jesus tells the lawyer who asked, "Who is my neighbor?" Go and do likewise. A similar expansion of the meaning of neighbor occurs in Matthew 5. You have heard that it was said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. This is a challenging word that raises many questions about our need for safety from enemies. I won't attempt to answer those questions here, except that I will simply observe that praying for enemies, as Jesus asks, can change attitudes toward them without necessarily putting anyone in greater danger. Another observation is that the kind of love Jesus teaches is not passive and compliant in the face of injustice. Love often involves witnessing prophetically, as Jesus' own example shows in his prophetic ministry. The American political climate might improve if people on both ends of the red-blue spectrum took more seriously the call to love our political enemies. Can people on the progressive side reject Christian nationalism while simultaneously loving Christian nationalists? I hope so, because I believe that a campaign against Christian nationalism must be loving as well as firm and courageous and nonviolent to have any chance of changing people's hearts and minds. Lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love, the song says. The murder of Charlie Kirk this week was a tragedy, of course, for him, and also for his family, and for everyone who agreed with him. I submit that it was also a tragedy for those of us who disagreed with him, and for the country as a whole. It has increased the danger of an escalating cycle of violence. The least we can do in times like these is to state clearly and consistently that political violence is wrong, no matter who is involved. I hope we can do more than that. I hope that we can lead with love for all our neighbors, even when they don't love us. And I know that's hard, and I know it takes courage and risk. The biblical trajectory toward expanding the definition of neighbor began in Judaism long before Jesus. Whereas Leviticus 19:18 assumes that neighbors are members of the same tribe or nation, Leviticus 19:34 expands the love command to include foreigners living in the tribe's territory. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the native born among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. Welcoming strangers was an important ideal for Jesus. According to Matthew, he grew up as a refugee, first in Egypt and then in Nazareth. The parable of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25 proclaims that nations will be judged based on whether they have fed the hungry, given water to the thirsty, clothed the naked, visited the sick and imprisoned, and welcomed strangers. Jesus said, "Just as you did it to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me." All three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, share the belief that we can love God by loving our neighbors, including strangers. The Hadith literature of Islam has a close parallel to this passage in Matthew. This sculpture by Jimmy Lou Mason is based on the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verses 1 to 17. In that passage, Jesus lovingly washes his disciples' feet and then commands them to follow his example of humble service. He's taking the role of a slave. The sculpture is located in Washington, D.C., outside of Christ House, which is a medical facility for people experiencing homelessness. It invites people on the street to imagine themselves accepting care from Jesus. By depicting Jesus in jeans, Mason also suggests that people today can take the role of Jesus, whether by giving care or by receiving it. Christ House is just 2 miles from Lafayette Square, where President Trump brandished a Bible. He did so after U.S. Park Police, on his orders, cleared a mostly peaceful protest of racist policing. As we compare the two images, I invite you to consider these questions. Which posture is more faithful to the teachings of Jesus? Which is better for America? Which is better for the future of Christianity in America? Which is a clearer expression of love for all kinds of neighbors? 1 John 4:18 declares that perfect love casts out fear. In line with that truth, I submit that the love Jesus modeled and taught is an essential biblical response to Christian nationalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ulrich.
For that. My name is Rebecca Reeder. I am a Fort Wayne native. I've been here my entire life, even though I didn't really mean to do that. I am a retired classroom teacher. Following my classroom experience, I did a great deal of work with an organization called the Center for Civic Education that worked with teachers on and developed materials on the Constitution and Bill of Rights. I have been, always been a lifelong lover of education. So you can see that something like this really gets me excited. And I'm happy to be a part of the planning and happy to be a part of the group Hoosiers for Separation of Church and State. I guess I'm going to have to say that actually I was one of those founders too. It's my pleasure today to introduce our panel. We wanted to bring in a very local connection to things that were going on in our community. So we've invited a panel of local leaders from various walks of life. I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order because I couldn't think of any better way to do it. Besides, I was a teacher and you do stuff like that. We're going to start with Steve Carr. He is a film and media historian and director of the Purdue University Fort Wayne Institute for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. And I thought Hoosiers for Separation of Church and State was a long name. He has been a postdoctoral fellow at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and a Lowenstein Weiner Marcus Research Fellow at the American Jewish Archives. He's an author of Hollywood and Anti-Semitism, A Cultural History Up Till World War II. He has published numerous essays, and the forthcoming Holocaust in Hollywood Studios at Home and Abroad, soon to be released 2026. Steve Carr. Lori Gray is a local attorney. author, advocate, and the legislative coordinator for Indiana National Organization for Women. Through her company, Socratic Parenting, LLC, Lori works to empower people to feel, think, and act with their own spiritual awareness, clarity, and confidence. Most days, you'll find her on the second floor of the Allen County Courthouse, working as a court-appointed guardian and ad litem for children in need of services. Lori Gray. Dr. Jacqueline King spent 26 years in various management positions for the largest electric and gas company in New Jersey. She has had a life of service, having served on many boards, too many to even name, truthfully. She served as commissioner on the Greensboro Human Relations Commission, was on the Police Community Review Board, and the Chief of Police Faith-Based Council. Dr. King has received numerous awards and certificates of appreciation, including the YMCA New Jersey Minority Achievers Award in 2001 for community service and professionalism. She's lived in Fort Wayne about 5 years, and she's one of our best kept secrets. Dr. King. Zachary Parrish, who would be last in alphabetical order if I was using first or last names, is a co-founder of Secular Education Association. He's a single father and a renounced Mormon who has been sounding the alarm about LifeWise Academy's release time religious instruction programs and their Christian nationalist agenda since 2021. Secular Education Association is a national grassroots group dedicated to organizing, watchdogging, and fighting back against the multifaceted attacks of religious encroachment in public schools. Zach Parrish.
So I guess I'll begin. Hopefully folks can hear me back there. I wanted to focus on what Christian nationalists think of the Holocaust and its specific and unique dimensions of Jewish suffering and mass murder. Judging from some previous public statements, the answer is surprisingly complicated and perhaps even contradictory. The current day belief system of Christian nationalism often draws upon long-standing anti-Semitic tropes. During the Nazi era, these tropes combined with eugenic pseudoscience to eventually justify genocide. But unlike Nazism, many Christian nationalists today have tried to join American Jews in expressing strong support for Israel. For this reason, American Jews need to remain very wary of this support. At its most basic iteration, Christian nationalism believes that Christianity should exist at the center of American political life, with other religions relegated to civic margins. According to the Indiana Citizen, this past May 22nd, Indiana legislators introduced H.R. 53, which called for the Indiana House of Representatives to, quote, humbly submit its ways to the Lord Jesus Christ, end quote. Whether intended or not, such views advocate for the sidelining and exclusion of anyone not Christian, including Jews, from the center of political and civic life. History has shown that disenfranchisement, stripping of property rights, and loss of citizenship all begin with a belief that the supremacy of a singular religious or political identity defines national identity. While self-avowed Christian nationalist Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith has expressed what he called unwavering support for Israel and for Judeo-Christian principles, many others allied within this community promote familiar anti-Semitic paradigms, such as baseless accusations of Jews as Christ killers, or they promote anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that Jews are a supposed cabal of global elites who control banking, media, and the government. Christian nationalism also has a spotty relationship to the Holocaust itself, with many in the Christian nationalist community downplaying the magnitude of Nazism's unique, targeted, and systematic mass murder of Jews. Often this diminishment of the Holocaust goes hand in hand with making false equivalents to the suffering of other groups both then and now. For example, in a January 2024 speech, Heritage Foundation president and Project 2025 architect Kevin Roberts claimed abortion access was equivalent to concentration camps in Hitler. Some on the left have made similarly insensitive and offensive comparisons between Israelis and Nazis, but these views do not characterize mainstream liberal pluralism, left positions, or even those who may criticize Israeli treatment of Palestinians. Many Christian nationalists, like Beckwith, express strong public support for Israel and the Jewish people, but some Christian nationalists also publicly and privately embrace Holocaust distortion or use the language of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. American Jews need to examine the sport more carefully. In many cases, some Christian nationalists have instrumentalized their support for Israel or their professed love for the Jewish people as a way for them to express xenophobic, anti-immigrant, or anti-Muslim beliefs, targeting others simply because of their identity. Furthermore, many Christian nationalists support Israel in the hope that Jews from the U.S. will self-support to their supposed homeland. Others believe that Jewish emigration to Israel will hasten the so-called end times where all non-Christians, including Jews, will die off during the apocalypse. Such views justify caution and skepticism when considering Christian nationalism's apparent support for the Jewish community. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. The format we're going to use today is each of the panelists will have an opportunity to talk with you, as Steve did, about how they see Christian nationalism impacting the work they do, the organization they represent, or in their daily lives. When they're finished talking with their individual presentations, then they'll have an opportunity to have a conversation among themselves and ask one another questions or add comments to what they've what one another has said. So thank you, Steve. Next will be, I forget who's, I think it's Lori, isn't it?
Lori.
Yes.
I seriously am about to confess to something I didn't even do, sitting under this.
Would you
I'm
like-
just going to stand up here.
Sure.
Is that okay?
The light is bright from up
It is
here, and especially right
blinding.
there.
It's nice to see that there are actually people out here. So for most of my professional life, I have been an advocate for women and children, parents and families. And based on my education and experience, I think the best thing that I can tell you today is Christian nationalism claims to be pro-family, but it is not. Christian nationalism is pro-men. It is not pro-women. It is not pro-children. Men should be in a position of authority where they are endowed with unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the right, the God-given duty to exercise authority over their women and children who are not endowed with these same unalienable rights. Women have the duty to submit and obey. Children need to be seen and not heard. And if you really want to know how not pro-family, not pro-woman, not pro-child Christian nationalism is, read the Dobbs decision. Read Project 2025. Project 2025 was written by Christian nationalists. And the Christian nationalists on our United States Supreme Court who wrote the Dobbs decision, they had zero consideration for women or children, born or unborn. If you read Justice Alito's majority opinion, you'll see three things. Number one, the only constitutional right that women have is the right to vote under the 19th Amendment. Christian nationalists want to do away with that. Second, abortion has nothing to do with women and children. Abortion is a medical procedure. It's a 10th Amendment states' rights issue, just like slavery was a 10th Amendment states' rights issue, because the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 9th Amendment didn't apply to enslaved human beings. Third, because abortion is a states' rights issue, the state can do whatever it wants as long as it gives you some rationale as to why it's going to do it. So compare this to men's autonomy, personal autonomy, and reproductive rights. Absolutely a fundamental right for men with strict scrutiny. The government cannot infringe upon a man's fundamental right without a very, very good reason, strict scrutiny. So to say it more simply, the presumption for men is that there's a very strong presumption for men that the government can't interfere with their personal freedom, personal autonomy, reproductive rights. There's an even stronger presumption against women that the government can interfere. So when a man has equal protection, equal rights throughout all 50 United States, my right as a woman depends upon what state I am in. And to understand, Project 2025 wants to make men the breadwinners again. That women need to be back in the home. They need to know their place, and they do not have a right for financial independence. They don't have a right for self-determination. And one of the biggest reasons that women have forgotten this is because of birth control. And so just the past couple of weeks, I'm reading that the United States government, this administration, would rather destroy contraception than distribute it to women, 30,000 women who need and want it. And this administration is starting to redefine birth control and abortion as the same thing so that they can start criminalizing birth control just as they have abortion. So also this past week, the President of the United States went on national television and said domestic violence is just a marital spat. It's not a real crime. Do you know that a woman is more likely to be shot in her own home by an intimate partner than a police officer is likely to be shot in the line of duty by a criminal? Christian nationalism makes our homes unsafe for women and children. Christian nationalism is not pro-family.
Thank you, Lori. Dr. King.
Yes, so having built a social network of close to 4 million women across various platforms, I hear the cries from women, all women. It's not just Black women. But let me just say that I'm disappointed that I'm the only Black person here that I can see. Yeah. But here's the issue. You have to understand that Christian nationalism was built on slavery. If you look at everything that they did to the slaves, that's what they're trying to do to us today. Yeah. Go back and check your history. They controlled the slaves through Christianity. If you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you were going to hell. And that was your punishment, and nobody wanted to go to hell. That is why I believe that there's not that many Christians in Fort Wayne that will even partner or even listen to this, because a lot of them still believe abortion is bad, gay people are bad. This was passed down. My grandfather was a pastor for 70 years. Okay, I'm different. But the point is, this is something that we have to address. And something that I read, believe it or not, 75% of white people have no connection to black people. Can you believe that? 75%. You know what that means? So that means that if you're uneducated, all you have to listen to is the TV or the political views of the people who look like you. That's why we are where we are today. One of the things, thank you, restrictive rights, abortion laws, Christian nationalist theology also pushes for laws leaning severely eliminating abortion, sometimes without exceptions, for rape and incest. They don't care if you're raped. They don't care anything about it. You really have to take this serious, because it's affecting women, it's affecting minorities, it's affecting the immigrants. They have done nothing. There's no reason why they should be deported to places that they've never even lived. We really have to take this serious. I wish that we could do this again and we could make an effort to get more people of color here, but I think that's something that we're going to have to work on. You have to know that women in Indiana, and I have the statistics, is one of the worst maternal mortality rate in the United States of America. It was bad before Trump got in the office. What do you think we're going to go now? Because you can't get a D&C because you're having a problem. And black women, it's even worse. So for me, this is near and dear to my heart. I hear from the women every single day in my inboxes, all over Facebook, LinkedIn. We're on everything. So this is something that we have. It's not an option. We have to come together. It's not an option. And whatever it is you can do, you have to do it. It's not I want to do, I might not do it, I'll think about it. You have to do it. So let's stick together.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, first off, I just want to thank Rebecca and Evan and Jim and all the Hoosiers for inviting us all up here and putting this event together. I've been working really closely with them, so I know how much work they've put in behind the scenes. So I really just want to give them a big thank you for putting this together. So like Rebecca mentioned, you know, I'm the co-founder of Secular Education Association. I've got the other co-founder down here in front. She joined us from Ohio. But our organization is really focused on the children, right? We've talked about the women, we've talked about the minorities, but this Christian nationalist movement has such a stranglehold on the children. That is a big target of theirs. You know, like our first speaker for Americans United mentioned, they are really attacking public schools, and that is by design. They are trying to get into these schools so that they can get these next generation into the same mindset that they are already in. And nobody is standing up for their rights. Nobody's thinking about the children themselves. You know, we have young daughters. I have a young daughter. My co-founder has a young daughter. So this is something that really hit home for us personally when it started invading our lives and our child's lives. You know, 5 years ago, I would have never considered myself an activist, but I've, you know, helped build an entire movement fighting back against this stuff because it affected me personally. And that's really what it takes with most people, unfortunately. You know, a lot of people don't care about this stuff until it affects them personally. And when we talk about Project 2025, we have to understand we're talking about, you know, this broad thing, this big thing, but there are so many little tentacles and little arms of that. You know, whether we're talking about the 10 Commandments in schools, whether we're talking about release time, which is what our organization is primarily focused on, because it's often overlooked by other organizations. And, you know, the general discussion often overlooks release time religious instruction because it is constitutionally upheld. And, you know, I'm sure many of you here probably remember in Fort Wayne, or if you're from the area, or even Gary, Indiana, you know, is actually kind of where this started. They had the trailers that would come onto the schools and, you know, pull these kids out for religious instruction. Imagine that, but 10 times worse in today's climate with the money of Project 2025 and all of these huge organizations behind them. That's what we're dealing with today. That's what our kids are dealing with today. The pressure and the coercion to have this mentality, to have this worldview. This is what they're trying to get our kids with. And, it's something that we really have to watch out for and stand up against. So that's what we see, in the work that we're doing.
Thank you. So I do have a couple of follow-up questions before I let you have your conversation with one another. Zach, would you please tell us a little bit more? I know you can do like a 2-hour presentation on this. Could you tell us a little bit more about LifeWise, which is coming and is in Fort Wayne, and what it is you're working hard
Sure.
against?
I was going to avoid it and try to stick to the broader strokes, but since you asked.
Nope, go for the jugular.
Yeah, LifeWise Academy is, like I said, it is this release time religious program. Much like what I'm sure some of you are already familiar with from, the days before when we had the trailers in the schools, but this is just an entirely different beast. It is so well funded, so well organized. It's a plug and play model that is franchised and designed to be that way so that anybody can come into the schools. And another big difference that we're seeing now with this program is that they're out here changing state legislation. Back when we had the trailers at the schools, this was optional for the schools. Schools could allow these programs to happen. This organization, LifeWise, has went and lobbied legislators here in Indiana specifically, in Ohio, in Oklahoma, in Texas, in Iowa, and in Montana. And they've changed the laws there so that schools have to have these programs in. And they're trying to do it all across the country. Those are just the states that they have successfully done it in already in just the past couple of years. They have 20 more bills that they are putting out across the country trying to get these laws changed so that schools have no option. They have to allow this program to come in and pull these kids out. And what we see is they're incentivizing them by giving them ice cream parties to recruit their friends. They're sending golden invitations with their students to try to get the other kids to come with them. They're making this so much fun. And what kid doesn't want to leave school? They turn this into a mini field trip for a period, unfortunately. And what we see is ostracization and discrimination, right? My daughter didn't go, and she was shoved into a study hall in the gymnasium in 2nd grade to read by herself, while all the other kids are going off campus to have ice cream parties and pizza parties and play games. That's not fair. That's not right. And that's a violation of my daughter's rights as far as I'm concerned. And that's what got me fired up and started in all of this, right? But it's not just me. We have seen this story play out time and time and time again with this program.
Thank you. If you want to talk more to Zach,
Secular Education
has,
for 2 hours,
has a table out there, and he does a great presentation. Dr. King, I'd like to ask you to share a little bit more about your not-for-profit organization that you run. You told me that it had a very Christian message to it. So how can you help those women understand that Christian nationalism is not, if this is an organization or a group of people working to counter Christian nationalism, that we're not anti-Christian?
Well, honestly, if you look at the makeup, we have everybody in there, non-Christian, Muslims, Jews. We embrace everybody, and it's actually in our mission statement. So even though the foundation is Christian, because that's who I am, and I don't deny it, I'm not ashamed of it, but I'm not a radical that believes that, Christians should rule the world or tell people what to do. We don't teach that. We teach love, like the pastor said, love and support. That's what we teach, and that's really who I am. So anybody that comes to us, we don't turn anybody away. It's really about Christianity. It's really about love.
Thank you. So I have read in the past, actually from the book, The Flag and the Cross, that the difference between patriotism and nationalism is patriotism is driven by love of country. Nationalism is driven by fear of the other. How does that play out in the work you do?
I mean,
Go for it.
sure. Like I said, when we're talking about the children specifically, they are other. That is what we see happening time and time again with these types of programs. And even if we're not talking about this, release time, when you're putting the 10 Commandments up on the wall of the school, how does the Jewish kid feel, right? How does the atheist kid feel? They are othered by that.
I'd like to add, and how do women feel since, the commandment of don't covet your neighbor's ox or ass or any wife or manservant or maidservant. I mean, it promotes slavery and misogyny. So it's not really positive for women either.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I want to refer back to Dan's presentation earlier about love. I mean, love for whom? Or like, what does that mean in different contexts? I mean, again, if you sort of go back and look at the history of the Holocaust, this sort of the process of othering was, kind of a key step that led to mass murder and genocide. And everything in between, right? So, I mean, to me, it's like when I think of love in these contexts, I often think of like Dr. King's, Martin Luther King's version of love, where the parent has love for the child, but it doesn't mean that a child can do whatever the child wants. Mm-hmm. The parent has to be there to try to correct the child's behavior, and I feel like right now. If what we want is a secular, plural democracy, then we still really have to try to find ways to express our love by holding our leaders and our governments accountable.
Let me say, so I don't know if you all know that over 300,000 Black women have lost their jobs since Trump has been in office. And this is a thing. We're afraid that they're going to take our jobs. That's money that we should be making. They only got it because of their color of their skin. That's afraid of the other. Mm-hmm. All right. So yeah, that's what they're using to get people afraid. The immigrants. They're taking our jobs, and now they're shipping them out. So who's doing the job? But that's the biggest thing that they're using is the other, afraid of the other.
Mm. Yeah.
And it's everybody. It's the groups that haven't been mentioned here too. It is the LGBTQ
Yes.
community.
Right, exactly.
It is anybody who doesn't adhere to what their version of this is. And that can change too. They can be dynamic with what their version of this is, right? But typically it is a straight, white, male Christian who believes this interpretation of Christianity. I think that's really important to understand too. I'm like Rebecca mentioned, I was raised Mormon. I understand a high control religion very well, right? And like Dr. Ulrich was talking about, I found it interesting in his presentation. I saw a lot of quotes and words that I also see being used by the evangelicals and the Christian Nationals. I'm sure that's probably intentional, but it just goes to show how these things can be interpreted so differently, right?
Right.
The other thing I would like to add and follow up to that is that the concept of lead with love, fear is really a powerful motivator, and it can take control of you and drive you to do things. And when you feel fear, neurobiologically, we're not really wired to feel fear and feel love at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so when we choose love, and we act with love, it doesn't mean that we're not going to sometimes have fear, but we actually have to choose it. And I have to say, that's one of the biggest concerns I have when we change our Department of Defense to the Department of War, and we're just going to start leading with, fear and no due process. We can just blow ships out of the water. It's really, really a dangerous time that we're in. And the only way that I can think of for myself to combat it is choose love.
Yeah, but when you look at the administration, nobody on the Republican side is doing anything out of fear. They're afraid of what he's going to do and what his followers are. They know all this stuff is wrong. So yeah, everything is driven by fear, and it is very dangerous.
And we see that fear in our work too. When we're talking about students and parents, I can't tell you how often parents come to me or Molly with something privately, but they just cannot speak up about it publicly because they are so scared of putting that target not only on their back, but then on their child's back as well.
Yeah.
Well, all of you have mentioned today that the people that are the most vulnerable to the dangers of Christian nationalism are Black and brown brothers and sisters and the LGBTQ community. And Dr. King also pointed out to us that she's the only Black face in this room. And so why are we not reaching the members of the Black and brown community with this message? We tried. We've tried. They're not, for whatever reason, hearing. What can we do? How do we reach the Black and brown communities to help them understand that this is not in their best interest to allow Christian nationalism to continue to escalate?
Yeah, so I know this might sound funny, but everything happens over food. I'm serious. If you have a dinner, a free dinner, that may and invite them, they'll listen. But coming here and just listening to a bunch of white people, I'm just being honest.
Sure.
That pretty much is not going to happen.
Sure.
And I have to imagine they got a lot of other stuff on their plate too. Like they've already been worried about this and the persecution that they have went through for so long, right? I would imagine, again, I can't speak as a white man, but like I would imagine it's just more of the same. Is kind of how it would be viewed to some certain context. You know, we're talking about the immigrant community. Right. They have their own fears that they're worried about and dealing with right now, you know. Right. So I'm sure that probably all adds into it too.
So I would add to what this Dr. King is telling us about connecting and networking and really reaching out to do that, because you have to make the effort and meet people where they are, because we naturally go with the way that we've gone. Nobody told us, guys over there, girls over here. And yet, look at us. We just do it.
Yeah, and then, I mean, I serve on the Community Harvest Food Bank. I'm a board member there. And I know they have been done the Juneteenth fair every year. And I'm telling you, the people come out. They're going to get free hot dogs, a bag of chips. Doesn't cost that much, but they come out. That's where your message, you got those people. You have, like you said, meet them where they are. Go where there's going to be a big event and get on the agenda.
And then connect those things that they're already worried about to this.
Thank you. So we probably should be thinking about wrapping up here relatively soon. So I would like to kind of end on maybe a hopeful note. So what can you point to as signs of hope within the work that you do, the life you live, the organization you're part of? What signs of hope can you share with us?
Let's go reverse alphabetical order.
Okay. Zach, you just got picked to go first.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
I mean by first name.
I can say for myself, it is a very bipolar mindset, because some days I am absolutely crushed under the weight of what we're fighting against, to be honest with you. It can be very overwhelming to look at what we're fighting against and the odds of actually beating it and pushing back. But then the next day I'll have somebody reach out to me and say, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. You've made a difference. And we can point to different things, specifics that we have made a difference. We have changed legislative policy in Ohio specifically. We made actual changes there. We couldn't stop the legislation, but we did get positive language added to that legislation because of the work we're done. But just to know that we're speaking for the voiceless means a lot to me.
I'll go. So reaching 4 million people on social media, we use our platform to get information out to people who wouldn't ordinarily get it. So we have 300,000 people that follow us on LinkedIn, and we're talking about everything. And then in the middle of that, we're encouraging them. You've got this. It's okay. We're going to be together. So we're at a place where people need encouragement. Everybody's feeling, I got friends who are doctors are like, I don't want to get out of bed today. People need encouragement. We need each other. So that's what we do every single day. They're going to turn on, people say, write me and say, like, I don't know what I would do without, we call it BWE. I get up every day, I'm gonna find something that's gonna make me feel good. We share stories of people doing like amazing things. So we're giving people hope.
I would say that, I mean, it's so hard. It's so hard, especially with you try and stay informed and you try and figure out what's going on, and it's just drinking from a fire hose all the time. And so it's like you have to be able to turn off. But every day I'm going to read Sheila Kennedy and see what she has to say about Indiana, and I'm going to read Heather Cox Richardson and I'm going to see what she has to say. And she usually has some context, and that does give me hope. And I also read Joyce Vance every day because that's more of the national legal. But when you get that historical context, I mean, I think one of them that I have is my husband's 84 and he's a Vietnam veteran, and he seems to be a lot calmer about things, and I've always thought it's because he's a white man and he thinks he can take care of his women. But I also, he for the first time this last year said, you know what, let's watch that Ken's Burn Vietnam thing. And so I'm watching what it was really like back in the 60s. I don't remember this. I was born in 63 and I don't know what happened in all of that time. And the first episode where you've got like monks pouring gasoline on themselves and I'm like, okay, so this is unprecedented, but it's been bad before. And there are really, really good people. And I do think that we have to get out and we have to vote and we have to connect with each other. It is beyond me how you could gerrymander Indiana to where a statewide election, I mean, that's not gerrymandered, right? We all voted for governor. We all voted for, and it still comes out the way that it does, but we have to not disconnect. We have to engage. We have to connect, but we also have to have some self-care and give yourself a break once in a while.
I mean, I don't know if this is a note of hope or not, but I think fear of the other needs a fertile field to take root. Mm-hmm. Christian nationalism did not appear out of thin air. Trump did not appear out of thin air. What I think these recent events have done is really expose long-standing structural weaknesses and neglect in our society and in our culture. I think now is a time for us to start building capacity for when I hope this cycle of racism, sexism, xenophobia, other bigotry will subside, and I have to believe it will. And we really, and at that point, once we've built capacity during these challenging times now, we can really recommit to the work that we should have been doing before Project 2025. Right. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to chime in and tell you one thing that gives me hope, and I'm going to start with these four panelists and our two speakers. Not only did their messages give us something to really hang a hook on and some work that we know we need to do, I will tell you that we've been in the planning stages of this event for several months, and when we invited our panelists, when we invited our speakers, nobody told us no. Everybody said, you bet. So that gives me a whole lot of hope that we have community leaders, we have people in across the state that are willing to come and talk about this. The other thing that gives me hope is looking out on this group of people on a Saturday afternoon who are willing to sit here for nearly 4 hours. It's pretty amazing. And I'll tell you this too, that when we put out the registration for this, we had 187 people that registered. Now, you know, there are not 187 people in this room, but there are a lot. What we were told is 40% of those people won't show up. You know what? We got a pretty good show. So thank all of you for coming today. You give me a lot of hope. I see you networking with one another. I see you talking to one another. I see you out there with those tables, interacting with the people that have things offering for you to do and ways for you to help. So thank you for that.
I'd like to add to that, like, anybody can make a difference. You need to keep that in mind as individuals. I'm sitting up here next to doctors and professors, and like, I'm not that, but I've made a difference. Anybody can do a little bit of work and make a difference, so hold on to that, spread awareness, and do what you can.
So thank you to our panel, and I'm going to invite you to return to your seats, and we got a little bit of a closing here that I want to share with you. So at the beginning, Evan promised you a full menu, a full meal of information today, and I hope you're not feeling like you've overindulged. But now that we know more, what will we do with what we've learned? As you know, there are 7 tables of organizations out there in the lobby waiting to give us some ways to make a difference. And if you haven't already, please find a place you can serve. There is so much work to be done. Poet and civil rights activist Maya Angelou tells us, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. Each of you will have a different way to use what you know, what you now know, which should be more. But together, we can make things better. I see change coming.
Production facilities provided by Access Fort Wayne. Learn more under the Explore tab at acpl.info.